Hi, this is Ibadi NX from the Candid Frame, and we're continuing our series on black and white conversions. On the last two videos, I showed you how I do black and white conversions natively in Adobe Lightroom, and then I showed you Nik Silver Efex Pro 2. And today I'm going to show you another plugin called Macphun Tonality, and this is an application that I've been using just fairly recently for a short time, but there's a lot to like here. It's not going to be a comprehensive review. If you're looking for something along those lines, you may find something better on another YouTube channel. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time making a comprehensive analysis of these applications, but I just want to give you an idea of the tools that are available and the different ways there are for being able to create a black and white conversion. Some of these you may find work best for you, but thankfully a good number of them offer free trials, so you can try them out for yourself to discover, which one works best for you. Now, as I talked about before I bring it into a plugin, what I've been favoring doing lately is to flatten the image. So here's an image that I shot a couple of weeks ago, and this is the. Let me show you the original here. This is the original image that I shot at the Crawfish Festival in Long Beach. So I was faced with a very high contrast situation. He was underneath a tent while he was playing his horn, and as a result, the background was really washed out. And so I tried to find a good compromise of exposure where I get a good amount of exposure on his face and his body, but also tried to retain some detail in the highlights. This was shot as a raw file, which I converted over to a DNG. So out of the camera, it doesn't look like I have very much detail out there, and I really don't. But when I flatten the image, I can see that I am able to pull out just a little more detail that I can come up with than what the camera gave me initially. So that's what I wanted to have as my starting point for the black and white conversion. Though I won't be able to restore all the detail that was in the sky, it was an overcast day, I still want to be able to work with as much information as possible in the highlights and in the shadows. So when I flatten that image, it opens up the exposure, reduces the tweaks the contrast a little bit, and opens up the highlights and the whites. So now I'm going to go directly into the plugin, which will take a little bit, and then I'll walk you through Tonality Pro. Okay, so here we are with the flattened image in Tonality Pro. And for those of you who are familiar with Lightroom, you'll find that the layout in terms of the controls are pretty familiar. You have a large preview area here, and you have all the controls here for tone, clarity and structure, tone curve, vignette, so on and so forth on the right hand side. And then you have the previews of the presets over here at the bottom of the screen, and then you have these various controls up here in the menu bar, some of which I'll walk you through in a minute. Now the heart of this, much like Silver Efex Pro 2, is the presets they have. So if you go down here to the lower right hand corner, you'll see they have a variety of presets already embedded in the application for you. They have a basic black and white conversion, as well as presets specifically for different types of photography, like architecture, portrait, street photography, outdoor, and so forth. They even have an HDR black and white conversion here. And when you choose on any of these, you'll get these presets on the bottom of the screen. And as I cycle through here, you'll notice here that some of these controls will get highlighted in yellow, and in the case of clarity and structure, you'll see some of the adjustments that are been made for each of these different presets. So it gives you an idea of not only what sliders were engaged, but it also lets you know which of these controls were used to be able to create that preset. So when it's time for you to go in there and to tweak it, if you want to increase or decrease a specific effect, you know exactly where to go to when you find something that you like. If you find that you really like a specific preset, like this push process preset, you can simply hit the star button on the bottom, and that will place that preset into your favorites. And you can see that I've already selected several favorites amongst my collection here that I can always default to, because I think you'll find, like me, that there's certain black and white conversions that you're going to favor in terms of presets. And I see presets as a starting point. It helps to get me closer to where I want to be without having to start from scratch with all the different applications. So you have all these different controls here, and that's going to be absolutely important for you to be familiar with. But let's take a look at some of the controls in the toolbar. Now, here you have the ability to be able to change the size, magnify it, reduce the size, view the image at 100% if you need to. But here's the control, these two controls that you're going to be using often, which allows you to go back and forth between the image with the effects applied and going back to your original file. So here I'm just using the push process preset here, and then by just pressing the I symbol, you can see what we started with. So you can see with the preset alone, it makes a big improvement over what we started with here. You can also do a side-by-side comparison of the image, so you can sort of go back and forth and see which of the two you might refer. And then by just simply hitting it again, you go back to your single view. Now here you're able to rotate the image left to right. Here you have the histogram, which will give you a lot of that information that we talked about in the last video when we talked about the zone system, and how you can see how the different tones fall into each specific zone, which can be really helpful when you're tweaking the image and you want certain values to fall within certain tone ranges. Most importantly, just to make sure that you're not blowing out the highlights and the shadows. Here you can see when we go to this zone 10, that we're losing a lot of detail in the highlights. So if that was a concern for me, I could simply choose this, highlight it, and then adjust the highlight control and bring it in until I lose less and less of the highlight. You can see that it's affecting everything in this particular case. But there's something that we're going to be able to do in a minute to remedy the fact that everything else in the image is being made darker as a result of trying to bring back the highlights in that control. So once I've made these adjustments and I don't like it, I can always click here on Reset, and then it will go back to the original default, and then we can go back to any of the presets, in this case push process. Now here are the two controls that are going to be important to you, and I'm going to demonstrate as much as I can in this video. And this is the ability to actually paint in or erase any effect that we create using these controls onto the image. You have the brush tool, which, just like Photoshop or the adjustment brush in Lightroom, allows you to selectively add any effect over to the image here. And then you have the erase tool, in which you can do the reverse. You can actually take away the effect. It'll be much clearer to you as I walk you through the image. Now, before I start working on this photograph, and one more thing, we have a gradient tool, which is just like the gradient tool in the other applications that you can use effectively to selectively control where effect takes place. Now, the advantage of this application, well, the big advantage is the fact that you can work in layers. As you know, with Lightroom, you don't have the benefit of layers that you do have in Photoshop. Now, you have that kind of in Lightroom, because you can go into this plugin and start working with layers in order to control how the effect impacts certain parts of the photograph, and I'm going to walk you through that right now. So we have that base layer, which is the original image here, and what I can do is I'm going to go back to my reset, to my default, and I'm going to double click on this layer, and I'm just going to call this the original. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a layer by just hitting the plus button, and it creates a new layer. And then I'm going to take a look at my presets here, and I'm going to take a look at which of the ones that I already kind of favor that I want to use for this shot. And I'm thinking it's probably going to be push process or more details. I'm going to go with more details. And when we take a look over here on the right, you can see that the adjustment of more details is primarily occurring in the clarity and the structure slider. So I like the fact that by increasing the contrast and the micro contrast, that the details of his face, particularly the beads of sweat on his face, become much more pronounced. But I want this to be a little more punchier and contrastier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over here to the tone adjustment, and I'm going to tweak a little with the exposure. I'm going to open it up a little bit, and I'm going to see what the adaptive does here. Not doing a whole lot, but I suspect I'm going to go back to these controls as I start adjusting the contrast. So I'm going to increase the contrast, and then this is going to be more of a micro contrast control. I like what it's doing there. And now I'm going to see what I want to do with the midtones here. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to open up the highlights a little bit. And then I'm going to bring down the shadows because I want to increase the contrast a little bit. And then I'm going to go back here, and this is going to primarily impact the dark tones. You can see here if I shift it all the way to the right how much darker his shirt becomes. Don't want to take that too far. And then here are going to be the highlights, and you're going to see a big impact in terms of what's happening with the sky. I'm losing a lot of detail there, but I'm not focused on what's happening with the sky so much as what's happening with his face. Okay, so if I hit the eyeball, you can see the big difference and how that there's a big improvement in terms of what's happening in terms of the contrast for his face. So let's say that I kind of like the look. We're losing a little detail here on the saxophone, but that's primarily those are highlights, specular highlights that really aren't a big issue for me, but if they were, I could probably adjust them slightly. And that control is not doing it, but probably maybe the whites. Well, it's a specular highlight, so I'm not going to worry about it that much. It's not a real big concern that I'm losing detail there. What's more important is that I'm getting good detail here on the face. Now, what I want to do now is I just want to impact his face, and I don't want to have the adverse effect that I'm having in terms of the highlights to the sky. So what I can do is I can actually paint in the effect, and I'll hit the brush tool, and then you'll see here is my brush tool, and I can create a harder or a softer feathering by just hitting the shift key, and you can see how I can make that smaller area smaller or larger. And this is basically controlling the feathering. So I'm going to go start right here, and then I'm actually just going to start painting in the effect. And you can see it here. And if you want to make sure that you're falling exactly where you need to in terms of painting this, you can actually hit this show button here, and then you can just start making the brush a little smaller, and then just painting it. To try and get as much of the subject here as possible. And then you'll notice here in some areas I'll have overpainted, actually bleeding into the image. And if I want to correct for that, what I can do is simply hit the eraser tool, and then I'm going to adjust the brush for the right here slightly, and I can just correct it there. Not doing this perfectly, as you can imagine. I would be a lot more careful when I was doing this for an actual photograph that I intended to print or send for a client. But for now, that's going to have to just be good enough. So here, I'm seeing the impact of the effect, and then again, by going back and forth, I can see the impact that that's had. And you can see here that on the layer, you can actually see the mask that's been created here on the actual layer. So now I want to tweak with the background, because the contrast between the background and the foreground isn't what I would like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer, and let's actually take a look at what some of the other presets might actually do in terms of the background. Because of course I can always go in and tweak it so that it has just that much more. So I can do it individually, but I'd rather not do that. So I find that the underexposure here preset is pretty much in line with what I would like. But before I start painting or doing anything else, what I can do is I can adjust this slider here. And you can see that basically it controls the opacity of that background. So we can go all the way here to 0 and then slowly increase it until we get a slight change. You can go all the way. That's probably a little bit too dark. So, and again, I'm not paying attention so much to the subject because I've kind of already taken care of my subject here. Let's say I want it about right there, which is about 70%. Now, here I could actually do what I did before in terms of painting out the effect. I could take the eraser tool, for example, and I could just start to erase the effect from the subject here. Okay, but that takes a lot of time. I really don't want to end up doing that, so I'm going to paint this back. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mask from the second image. I'm going to copy it, move over to my next layer. I'm going to paste that mask and then invert it. And so now you can see that the impact of that adjustment is only impacting the background. So if I'm concerned at all in terms of how much of this is not being or being affected or not being affected, as you can see here, I'm missing some spots here, so I can go ahead and go back to the brush tool. Let's make it a little smaller, and then I can start getting into these areas that I want influenced by the mask. Obviously, Photoshop is going to give you much more extensive controls when it comes to selection of hair and things like that. So Photoshop definitely still has its advantages with respect to creating very precise masks. But for the images that I'm creating here, I'm not missing the fact that I don't have that fine control. Especially if you make a good selection of a nice feather, you can make it appear almost seamless. You remember, not everybody's going to be looking at an image at 100 or 200%. They're going to be looking at it at a normal viewing distance, and that's really all you need to be concerned with. So if I wanted to tweak this a little further, because it's a little flat as compared to the background, so what I can do is I can go here to the tone curve adjustment, and I just want to increase the contrast for the background a little bit. But when we go back here to the zone system scale, you can see that adjustment has brought me back from zone 10 to zone 9. And so all that detail that I was at risk of losing when I made the adjustment for my subject is still there now. I've been able to bring it down just by creating a preset and then taking the mask from the previous layer and simply inverting it. So let's see what this looks like compared to the original image. So here's the before and after. So you can see there's a real nice difference between the flat image and the one where I've tweaked. And you can see that I did it really fast. And you can build several layers into this in order to control various things. I can add a vignette to the image. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll do the size. We're going to feather it a little bit. Let's see what luminosity. No, I don't want to do that. Round this. Let's do increase that to about 54. It's a little bit too aggressive, just slightly. Okay. That looks good, and I'm able to place the center here, so let's place it on the center of the face. And you can also add grain, you can add photo frames, so on and so forth. And one of the best things about this application is that you can actually create your own presets if you want to. But that's it. I mean, it's it's very different in compared to Silver Effects Pro, in which I used a lot of control points to do it. With this, I'm actually doing it like I would in Photoshop, where I kind of make a global adjustment and then paint it in or paint it out by the result of using a mask. But one of the things this thing has is all these powerful presets to begin with. And that's something that's not really extensive. It's not really extensive in Photoshop. There are a lot of presets that you can purchase from people who've created all these different black and white presets, or you can create your own. But I like the fact that I can get so many different presets that can serve different images in different ways, and I think that that's really, really fun. And I find that this application really provides me an interface and a control that is very intuitive for me, having had used Lightroom before. A lot of people feel like, do I really need Photoshop? And with app plugins like this, I see very little need to go into Photoshop anymore, especially for my black and white conversions. I'm not doing composites or anything like that. I'm really looking at sort of tweaking my images. And between Lightroom and the various plugins I'm using, I rarely, if ever, need to go into Photoshop, which is, that's good for me. I know some people really love that application, but for me, I'm a Lightroom guy, and anything that primarily keeps me within Lightroom, I'm really happy with. So, just going to close this image, and all you have to do is just click apply, and it will process the image, and then we'll bring it back into Lightroom. So, if you want to do anything further to the image for output, be it on your website or on a book, you can really easily do this. So, I'm really just glossing over what this application is capable of doing, but thankfully there's a trial available. I'm not sure how many days the trial is. I think it's about 2 weeks, so you can try it for yourself and see whether or not it's something that might work for you. I think it's a very powerful tool, and I think that I'll probably use this as much as I'm using Silver Effects Pro for my black and white, specifically when I know that I want to work in layers. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and please provide me feedback on this or any of the other content we're providing on this YouTube channel. And if you're finding us for the first time, please check out The Candid Frame, which you can find at thecandidframe.com, which offers interviews with photographers from all genres of photography. There's a lot to be had there, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.